go. And so it is. Welcome to React Whiteboarding. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you some scenarios for components. It's going to be your job to write out those components. Now, there's a catch to this. You are not to use your text editor. I don't want you to have any of your familiar tools. I don't want you to have red squiggly lines. I don't want you to have X's. I don't want you to have code snippets. I want you doing this straight from your brain. There's parts of this that are probably going to start a little bit rough, but they'll get a little bit better the more we do it. That's exactly why we're doing this. And then I want you to Slack. So how we're going to adapt this, we normally do this with whiteboards. We have people write on the walls. I'm going to have you guys write it in a Slack message to me. So I still want you to do indentation, all that kind of stuff, but you don't get any of your text editor tools to help you. Questions about the conceit of this exercise?
Hey, you're kind of breaking up there for a second, but are we doing this, you said, without a code editor on a notepad or in a Slack message? Is that right?
Slack message.
Okay, cool.
Do it in a Slack message to me.
Cool.
Any other questions? Cool. So let's do our first prompt. Hey, Zach J. Welcome. Can you hear me, Zach?
I can.
Excellent. Welcome back, man. So I'm going to give you guys prompts. So your first prompt, we'll do a pretty straightforward one. Come on now. All right, so your first prompt, make a functional component that renders a paragraph with your name in it. So you need to include anything that would be in that file, all of your import statements, all the syntax, all of it there, straight from memory. So I want you to write this out and Slack it to me when you're done. Question?
I'm seeing a white screen.
Oh, come on, man. Oh, I am so over this whiteboarding tool. Hang on.
For clarification, we're doing a functional component, not a class component.
Correct. And I'll specify which one I want you to do. So this one is functional component renders a paragraph with your name in it. Any questions?
Component be called.
Oh, good call. It should be called nameplate.
Wait, Kyle, are you writing this somewhere where we're supposed to see it?
That's exactly what I'm doing. And I don't know what you guys are talking about. I've been sharing this the entire time. Any other questions? Cool. Go for it. Write it in a Slack message to me. No text editor.
in case you didn't know, if you type in 3 of the backticks, it goes into like markdown mode.
Correct. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, in your Slack message, put whatever your code is in. They're called code fences. Nice, James. Well done, Nolan. Cool. So, looking pretty good. If you got stuck, not quite there yet, send me whatever you got. Cool, very nice. So we seem to be largely in pretty good shape on this. A couple times I saw the export statement missing, so don't forget that. But otherwise, looking pretty darn good all the way around. Yulia getting fancy with it, very nice. Okay, so let's do another one. So for this one, let's see, can I just, yeah, I like that. I want you to make, let's do another functional component. I want it to have a first name and last name as props. And I want it to render a full name. Questions about that?
Component should still be named nameplate.
We'll call this one full name.
Are the first and last name 2 different props?
Correct. Other questions? Cool, go for it. Same thing.
that what he said?
This is a little arm cannon. And his up special is
It could be, but is that what he said it was?
no. There's the little arm cannon there. And yeah, redo your up specials. Okay, good. So a little bit trickier, this one. Let's take a look at some ways we could do this. Still coming in. Evan, always going for the terse ones. All right. So we need to import React. We want to export default function because it's a functional component. Calling the component full name. So this is the first thing that trips some people up. Props is the name of the thing that's going to get passed into this function when it gets called. We don't need other functions to exist. This can be all by itself. It's just saying, if you use me as a component, you need to pass in first name and last name. So, easy way to do this is to just return the paragraph tag that props.first name and props.last name. I saw a couple of you use string interpolation for this. You can, but why? It's already a templating language. So a lot of the, like under the hood, it's doing string interpolation. We don't need to also throw that on top. You can just write it out like that. Now, for bonus points, we got some repetition here. Props, 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 props. So we can destructure that stuff out. That would look like either this, say first name, last name equals props. That'll work. And that makes it so we don't have to use that word here. That destructures it out of props. Also, you can do that in the parameters. It's one of the coolest things you can do with destructuring. So instead of this line right here, we can make that first name, last name, and get rid of that altogether. Pretty cool. What questions do you have about that one?
Can you, I think I remember, can you do it as a single line return without the parentheses?
Yeah, totally can.
Okay.
We could do it like that. That's fine. The parentheses are nice because as soon as we do that, now whatever is happening in here, we can just write JSX without thinking about any other component formatting stuff. So I like to have all the JSX stuff on its own line, but no, there is no rule against one-lining that. And if you want to be a smart ass about it, you probably could have one-lined the entire thing with a fat arrow. Cool. Other questions?
So do you put first name and last name just outside of the function?
Okay, so to use this, some other function is going to have whatever its stuff is. We have a header and whatever else. And when it uses this full name function, it can pass in something called first name and something called last name, like that. That's how that component would get used.
Okay. So it has, if you're using props, it has to be passed from another component.
Correct. Props always come from the outside.
So if you're using props as the passed in argument, you don't have to do this dot props.
So this dot props, this only goes with classes.
Oh, okay.
We're doing functional components. There's no more this anymore.
So does the naming only matter if it's a hash? Because like if it was an array, for example, it would be looking at things by index. Is that right?
So props is always an object.
Oh, that's right.
It's
Okay.
an object with the key values from whatever these attributes we passed into the component are.
Oh, okay. But destructuring arrays, right? That's where the naming doesn't matter so much.
Yes.
Okay.
Throwing this out there for our resident hook fiend, Jason. If we had some state in here, we could do array destructuring. It's a really common way to handle hooks. So you'd have something like some state, something that sets some state. And then this would be some initial state. So the return value of use state is an array that always has two things in it. And so we can do array destructuring to pull those things out. Cool. What else? Other questions? Cool, let's do another one. So this one is going to be a class component. It's going to be called light bulb. Let's see, light bulb. And it's going to have some state that indicates if the light bulb is on or off. It's going to render whether it's on or off. And here's the real trick. Actually, I'm trying to mentally evaluate how fair this is. Have you guys done React events, like on click? I'm seeing some nods. I'm seeing some shaking heads. Okay, if you don't know how to do this, get as far as you can. And have a button that toggles the state. Class component, state that indicates whether it's on or off, render whether it's on or off. You just say true, false, whatever, that's fine. And then a button that changes what the state is. Go. All right, let's wrench on this for another minute. All right, go ahead and send me whatever you got so far. Lots of stuff in the ballpark. Cool. Let's talk through it. So we need a class component. Two different ways we can start this. One is like this. Totally fine way to do that. You can also, be careful in the syntax on this, do a named import like that, and that just lets you drop the React prefix on that. Side note, this looks like destructuring, and it kind of sort of works like destructuring, but it's not destructuring. It is a named import. It uses the same syntax as destructuring, but it doesn't quite work the same way. And where that'll bite you is if you export default an object and then you try to destructure it in your import statement, it doesn't work. It has to be a named export. And side note. Okay, so we start that way. That gives us our class component for light bulb. It has state that indicates whether the light bulb is on or off. Two different ways we can do this. The way that you're probably doing it in your labs, to have a constructor function that takes in props, and it calls super with those props, and then does a this dot state. And then maybe an is on thing. So you can do it that way. You used to have to do it that way, which is why the Learn Labs are written that way. You don't anymore, though. We got a better way to do this. You can replace all of that with just that. Does the exact same thing. Way easier. There's basically no reason in 2020 to use class constructors and React components anymore. Still works. This is a lot cleaner. So, all right, next thing. I saw a lot of people getting very clever with what was in state. So, I saw like switch onedness on, stuff like that. And that kind of makes sense because we want to render this at some point, right? And so like on and off certainly renders a lot better than true and false. So if we do the render function or the render method for that, might have something like this dot state dot switched onedness, and that'll show on. Here's the problem. Very difficult to negate that. I have to use conditionals and stuff to turn on to off. What works exactly like on and off but doesn't use those words?
True and false.
True and false, Booleans. So we can make that something like true. All right, well now we still have like the issue of like, well, how do I make that say on instead of true or false or whatever? So we got a couple ways we can handle that. Probably the most elegant is to have something like do a ternary, something like that. And notice that's inside of this render method. And then this can just be that. So that's a way to handle that. We're going to give you another pro tip. Anytime you have something that's a Boolean like this, see if you can make the variable name start with is, did, something like that. Like that, is on. It'll make every time you use that variable read very naturally. So this dot state is on. If that's true, return on. If that's false, return off. That's a lot better. Okay, so that renders whether it's on or off. It has state for being on or off. Now, very few people got the button that toggles state. So it works a lot like event handlers did in vanilla JavaScript. So I make a button here. I'll say toggle. So how we do this is instead of doing like $button.add event listener, you never interact directly with the DOM in React. You never interact directly with the DOM in React. You never, ever interact directly with the DOM in React. React sits on top of the DOM. It's doing all the DOM interaction for us, which means we're not allowed to anymore. That includes adding event listeners to things. That's a DOM thing. So what we do instead are these things called React synthetic events. They're stupid easy. You write on click, and then you give this the name of your event handler. Conventionally, people will call that like handle toggle, handle click, handle scroll, something like that. And then you need a method over here to handle that. Pro tip, use this fat arrow syntax always with React methods. You can do this for render methods, anything else. Use a fat arrow. You'll be glad you did someday. This is going to get passed an event. So if we wanted to use that event, we need to read something out of an input value, something like that, we can. And inside this, that's where your set state call happens. And you can do this in a couple steps if you want to, but honestly, this is probably the easiest way to do it. Set is on to whatever is on is not. That's how I would solve this. Oh, one more thing. Anybody see the problem with my JSX? It's a real subtle one.
This dot handle toggle.
Ooh, that wasn't even the one I was thinking of, but yep, good call.
Right now you still have on and off in the return array, and it should be true and false.
No, so in the ternary, this is the string that I want to come back based on this Boolean value. So I probably want this to say something more like on or off rather than true or false. But I need something to translate the Boolean that I have in state to the words on and off, which are just rando strings. Does that make sense? Somebody tell me if it doesn't.
I think I know what you forgot. Oh, never mind.
Do you need to call the function in the button?
No, just like in event listeners, I'm giving it a function definition, not the function itself. Or not the return value of the function, I mean.
I think I just had a light bulb moment. Doesn't state need to be in a constructor?
No, it doesn't. That's the thing that was the first thing that we talked about with the constructor and super and all that kind of shit. That was the old way to do it. We used to have to do it that way. Now we can just do it that way. It's way cleaner. And we don't need to call super. We don't need any of the other shit. It's in the JSX. That's where the problem is. So that's a real subtle one.
It needs to be in like a container, like a div or something.
Yes, that is exactly what it is. You're only allowed to have one top level element in JSX. I got two here. So you can do a fragment, or we can just wrap it in something. Wrapping in something is usually the better call.
On a tutorial video that was, it basically, you can create like this empty tag that they were showing. So it's like, it's like the tag, but it doesn't have any text in it. Like that, yeah.
That's a fragment.
Okay.
So you still so this satisfies the React rule that you're only allowed to return one top level element in your component. But when React renders it, it doesn't do anything with those. And so it'll just render those two elements.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's called a fragment.
What are the advantages to using a div there to wrap it instead of a fragment?
The advantage is now you have a way to target it, especially with like CSS or a testing framework or something like that. You can target the entire component at once. I think that's usually worth the extra element. Other questions?
Is this how you just get div soup? Is like frameworks like React that you have to kind of like nest everything in a div anyways?
A little bit. That definitely contributes to it. I'd say that's half of it. The other half of it is just being thoughtless about what these elements are, because there's literally nothing stopping me from just doing that. Oh, that could be a div. That could be a div. Button, well, button isn't anything special. That could just be a div too. Divs have click events. There you go. I made div soup with something that's got 3 fucking elements in it. The primary cause of div soup is just being completely thoughtless about why you're wrapping something in an element in the first place. And not like, there aren't that many of them. There's like 80 HTML elements. Maybe 20 of them get commonly used. Couldn't come up with anything more specific than div. I'm not saying never use divs. Sometimes like we don't have a built-in tag that labels something very well, but a lot of the time we do. And so it's like peak laziness. It usually comes from developers who go like, HTML is dumb stuff for babies. I'm a real programmer. I was like, wow. Well, it seems like figuring out what something means semantically, that's like a professional skill. Do you have it, motherfucker? Like, oh no, I meant more like with math and stuff. So don't be that cat. Cool. Other questions about this one? Let's do one more. I want the I spy with my little eye a class component that fetches a list of Pokemon. I don't care about the URL. And then adds them to state. And we're running a little bit low on time, so don't worry about rendering it or anything. Those 3 things. Fetches a list of Pokemon, adds them to state, class component. Go. Call it whatever you want, but Pokemon list.
Kyle, I think your mic's muted.
Kyle, we cannot hear you.
Holy shit, I've been talking for like 10 minutes. Good God. It's Friday for everyone. All right, well, imagine that I said a whole bunch of really witty shit. Including several things. I was like, you have to take this out of this lesson. So the big one is that this right here, if we're going to put something in state eventually, needs to stay the same data type. That works. That does not. That doesn't. That doesn't. And the most likely scenario, that doesn't. Want it to be the same data type as it's going to be. And the reason is because, like, if we're rendering that, we're probably mapping over it or something like that. You always need, it doesn't wait for it to be populated. It tries to map through that empty array. But if it's an empty string, strings don't have map. If we didn't define it, undefined doesn't have a map method. So you've got to keep the data type the same. Always, 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 even if it's empty. All right, so then over here, I was gonna like make something up, like I don't know the Pokemon API URL. Well, I've been using it every day for 5 years. All right, so we fetched. People were pretty solid on that. We parsed the response. Oops. And then do something like this dot set state, and we could do something like Pokemans are response dot Pokemon. That works. Cool. Something kind of like that.
Hey, Kyle, do we need to bring in component in the import, even though we're not going to be using JSX in this one?
We do, and I gotta actually use it. That helps. Yes. If I'm, like, it's like there's also just regular JavaScript classes that don't have shit to do with React. So if I want this to be a React component, I have to extend component. One more thing. That method, beautiful as it is, doesn't get called. So I can put it in a lifecycle method like component did mount. And call it in there. The advantage of keeping that a separate function is I can have other things besides just mounting a component that also do fetches. I can test that function separately from rendering it. And also, ultimately, what happens when a component mounts and that action are two different things? Ergo, they should be two different methods.
Kyle, don't you have to have a render function
Oh,
for a class
yeah, it'll be
component?
mad at you if you don't do that. there doesn't have to be anything in it, but it does have to exist. And then in real life, we would probably map through state like this. This dot state dot Pokemon dot map. Then take each one of them and maybe render its name or something like that. So then that's going to give me an array of these paragraph tags. Then in here, do something like that. And now they're on the page.
Since we're assuming this is an array, so that we'd need to put a key, right? Right.
Oh, yeah,
React requires a key.
It doesn't require it, but it'll get real damn annoying if you don't give it one. So it's whatever element gets returned from the map. So you could do something like key is key.id. Good catch. What else?
Wait, could you explain the key a little bit more?
Yeah. So whenever you iterate through something in React, like you're trying to make a bunch of elements out of an array, turn an array of Pokemon into an array of Pokemon elements. Every front-end framework requires you to put unique keys on those. Your best bet's the ID. Just take whatever the ID of that thing you're going over is and make that the key. What you should not do is use the index, which is it's everybody's hack for figuring out, oh no, I don't have an ID. So they just do something like that. Find something that's unique about each of those elements, even if you have to make it up. Find something unique and put that as the key. React needs it for performance management. Rendering lists of things is very difficult. And so one of the ways that React does that without catching on fire is with these keys. That's the exact same thing with Vue and Angular, like all of them.
I'm sorry you cut out and you might have said this, but why don't you use index if it's an array?
Because the index can change. You want something that can't change or shouldn't change. But if I have this list of Pokemon and I have them sorted by name, and then I reverse sort them by name or sort them by color or something like that, then all of React's optimizations break. The frameworks will usually catch you doing something like that and go, stop it, I told you to give me a unique value. But that's why.
I don't know how to phrase this, but the ID that's being assigned there, is that the one that's auto-generated, or is it referring to like an ID that we're assigning? Because I remember there was a quick workaround.
It was something that like I'm pretending came back from the API.
Okay.
Other questions about this?
An API that doesn't have a key, would you, like as you fetch from the API, would you assign a key to, like would you go through the entire return results and create a unique identifier, or?
Yep. And remember, it doesn't have to be.
Think about how you would.
Like,
Yeah.
It could also be a, like the Pokemon have to have unique names, right? So you could use the Pokemon's names as keys if you need to. It just needs to be unique. But yeah, if you don't have anything unique, then
Concatenate multiple fields.
totally, that works. Some people will like throw timestamps on it also.
Okay.
Just
Yeah, I was thinking of
anything that-
like, you know, if you have like a car, you know, there's multiple, you know, you might have an Acura from 2010, 2011, 2012, etc.
so then use
Yeah.
serial number.
Right.
Or yeah, you could concatenate a bunch of fields together as long as for that render, if nothing else is going to accidentally get that same value, you're fine. That works. What else?
So I guess like when you're rendering or returning multiple of the same, like that's the only time you really got to think about uniqueness to that extreme, right? Like if there's a repeat Pokemon being shown, then the linter is going to catch that.
Correct. Yeah, if you have two Pokemon that have the same ID, when you render it, React's going to go, you told me these were unique. Anything else? Cool. Hopefully this was educational. I'm doing a code challenge walkthrough. I'm going to use Bryce's from this morning if you want to check out that. And your week nice and easy. Otherwise, do some React practice, and I'll see you guys at Feelings. Bye.